this, like, what is it for? If you do not know, you should be worried. If you do not understand your own intentions, you gotta be honest about this. Like, what is my research for? My research is to be employed in academia. My research is to describe the connections between the narratives, affects, and production politics of alien stories, and the ways that we understand alienhood in our everyday life. How does it create dialogue? I do a lot of podcasting. We talk about ourselves on the podcast. I go back and listen to the podcast, and I'm hearing you are talking to everyone in every episode. You gotta stop it. Then I don't stop, and I get mad at that. And can we predict our harm? Some of the most common comments we get from people are like, Aaron's talking over people and interrupting people, and rather than be like, no, I'm not, I gotta be like, probably happening. Let's go listen to the tape. There it is. If you can ask these 5 questions about your research, Madison will say you are doing more ethical work. If you never ask any of these questions at all, she's saying that you know nothing about your work, and it may well be doing harm. It may be doing real harm. Raising awareness about dramatic tragedies in Africa is good, but only if it points to solutions that matter. And when it comes to solutions that matter, local homegrown solutions are it. And if you're not bringing those to the table in a meaningful way, you're not helping. You're just making people sad for a night and giving a movie an award, and then everyone leaves with no idea how to help when there are actual organizations on the ground that you could donate to make a difference. This book was written in the 90s. Things have changed a lot since the 90s, but they're all stayed pretty. And one of the big ones here is right up here at the top. Good intentions matter, we say, but hardly at all. Hardly at all. If you're a good intended person and you make a tone-deaf documentary, it's better than like purposefully making a tone-deaf documentary, but hardly at all. It's still a tone-deaf documentary. And if it wins awards, that's worse. Because now we're really setting the public imaginary in a tone-deaf way. She says in this book, the way we speak of people is the way they will be treated. And we know that. That's why we use the word we use when we call someone a monster, it's so people will treat them a certain way. When we call someone a hero of mine, it's so people will treat them a certain way. One of the most interesting things in the world when it comes to representation is when we say, you can't say that about this person. That right there shows you that we understand that there's a real material consequence to what we say. And one of the best ways that we can check ourselves is by looking at these 5 questions. She says that there are effectively 3 stances that we take. On page 6. The ventriloquist is what she's basically saying the documentary does, which is where you take a bunch of people's real words and you put them in an order that you like. If you don't put them in the order that they want, if you don't like bring the most important voices to the table, you're basically just holding up individual stories, individual voices you like, and making them talk to tell the story that you like. And it's not a question of dialogue, it's basically a bunch of talking heads on the screen. They may or may not be real people, it doesn't matter. If you put them in a certain place, their voices get distorted. A second kind of stance that we can have is where we just lead with the voices and make the researcher invisible. If you are nowhere to be seen, if you are completely invisible in the thing, you're not doing it. You're hiding. Like, where are you? Who are you? And how are you affecting this question? How are you affecting lens? You don't have to be front and center in absolutely everything, but you cannot be visible. You can't be hidden. All of the voices have to matter. You have to take the voices of the folks affected that you're talking about and keep your voice out of it. The third one is activism. This is the one that she suggests. She's like, whether you know it or not, you are an activist. If you do not know it, your activism is apathy. You just do whatever you want. That's your team apathy. Great work. The question is, which side are you on? Who do you fight for? What are the causes? What are the purposes? What are the desires of your research? For intersectional feminism, justice, freedom, dignity, respect for difference, stuff like that. And she's like, objective thinkers will say that this distorts your thinking. I was on a podcast recently and someone's like, you used intersectional feminism to guide your research of alienhood. I'm like, I did. And they're like, isn't that a bias? And I'm like, absolutely. It is a very strategic bias. It is a very strategic bias. And I'm like, what happens if you do not acknowledge this frame? What happens if you do not just do your research the way you want and just think that that's it? Like, oh, I just did what I wanted. What kind of lens is that? Whose bias is that? Yours. I would much rather we bias our research based on known purposes and known causes and known goals. The way that it's still used in Share How Orientalism works. What was that podcast called? I don't know if I want to point it to you because it's a bad podcast. It's public. The guy out of Eureka's. It's not a bad podcast, but it absolutely platforms trans folks uncritically. It shouldn't. And I have a problem with that. But I want to show you one more thing before we go. I will put this on Canvas. We'll spend a little more time with this on Wednesday. We're running short on time. This is Conquer Good. This is Dwight Conquer Good. The story about Dwight Conquer Good is that his family lived in Chicago for a very, very, very long time. And his neighborhood gentrified around him. He lived in a part of Chicago that used to be a bunch of white families, and it turned into a bunch of what we would call inner city housing, and it became, quote, urban. And basically, by the time that he became a professor at the University of Chicago, which is one of the most famous Ivy Leagues in the country, Conquer Good was literally living in a gangland. That's what he was living, and he had for his whole life. And he was a communication studies scholar studying gangs. And what he was studying was that people from Harvard or people from Berkeley and people from UCLA would fly to places like Chicago to live with gangs for 3 months, and then they would write papers about gangs. And the papers would frame gangs as monsters or beasts or pathogens, or as ignorant. They're too stupid to know better, they're too evil to know better, or they're diseased. That's what gangs are. And long before the Fast and the Furious, I say, Conquer Good is like, no, gangs are families. Gangs are families. He's like, I have lived in Chicago with gang members my whole life. I've never met a monster. I've never met a pathogen. I have met big brothers and little brothers and mothers and fathers. And if you call them a monster, the gang is going to screw you up. If you treat them like what happens when you treat a family like a monster? How does that go for you and that family? Not well. That's not how that works at all. So Conquer Good provides this handy-dandy little chart that Madison explicitly references in the book, and we'll spend a little bit more time talking about it, but I want to get to know the stock. Go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with that, because my whole family is gangs. Like, I'm the only person in my family that's not a gang member. I mean, all my friends is gangs, and they're lovely people, people, and even gang members just came home from 30 years in prison, who's community activists, who now trying to get put in a grocery store, a black grocery store in our community. So I agree with you. It's just people who don't know anybody who are gang members, they have a negative perception of them. But ignorance is bliss, and a lot of people love to be happy. So I just want to input that real quick.
Oh, the image was cut in half because I had it half on my monitor and half off. I am very sorry about that. Let's see now. How's that? Better? Thank you, Casanova. I appreciate that feedback too. That lines up with this research. This is all blurry now. What Conquer Good shows, and this research is resilient, that if you treat a gang like a family, or if a gang is allowed to exist like a family, what they're actually going to do is make the community really cool and really safe and do a whole bunch and solve a bunch of problems that the state's never going to solve because the state don't care, and on and on and on and on. It is when gangs become enemies of the state or of the community that things just spiral. And you can't monsterify your way out of that. That hasn't worked. The good guys just have not been able to win. So what this chart lets us do is literally chart our position. The word of the day is positionality. This is Madison's word, and it's a useful one. Where are you on this chart? Where do you live? Detachment to the left, commitment to the right, identity up top, difference down below. If you are very, very like something and very committed, that's the enthusiast infatuation. You're just madly in love with it. You're so committed and you just love it to death, and it's like coming home from a single Barbie and like, I found the one. This is the one. They're just like me. They've got everything I've always wanted. And your friends are like, you said the last one was the one. And you're like, no, one. And because that doesn't say you change, your commitments change. You're just cruising single bars. There's no long-lasting commitment to that, and so it's just like a flash in the pan. For the people that sit there and say nothing, do nothing, they're pretty sure it's all stupid, it's all dumb. I'm listening, but it's all stupid. You are bottom left. You are the skeptics. That's super predictable. You just sit there quietly and judge the whole thing. You're pretty sure everybody's wrong, everybody's stupid, and you have nothing to say. If you are very, very committed to something, but very, very different from something, you run the risk of being a curator who basically just takes tourists to Ghana and tells them that it's bad there. And they don't really know what's going on, they don't really know who's trying to solve it, but they're pretty sure it's terrible, and then when people come to America, it gets better. And that's the curator's exhibitionism. It's not a critical gaze because it's very one-sided. If you're very, very different, you're very, very similar to something, but you're very, very detached, this can be very selfish, this can be dangerous. Conquer Good is talking about a bunch of people who lived in gangs, came out of gangs, went into the academia and wrote monster papers in gangs, where they were in a gang, but they're not in a gang anymore, and they don't live connected to a family or anything like that. They're just basically saying, I look like am a gang, and so I can speak for gangs. That's not dialogue. That's not dialogue with the community. That's not the same. Just because you were there once, that doesn't mean you are still now the thing that you're claiming to represent. The goal is what he calls a dialogical performance of genuine conversation. It's where we understand where we are on this grid. If you are a skeptic, that's cool. You're allowed. You just have to own it. You gotta be like, this is where I am when I come to this table. This is who I am. If you're an enthusiast or you're infatuated, you just have to own it. Madison is not saying white people can't make movies about racism. She's saying, as a black woman, white people make movies about racism without reflecting on what it means to be a white person. Thinking about racism is bad. It's really bad. And it doesn't mean you don't know anything if you're a white person. It just means if you don't understand how your whiteness is in your understanding, you don't know enough to create knowledge. And when we communicate, and even on the interpersonal level, we create knowledge. Some of the most important knowledge we create is on the interpersonal level. It's called gossip. People are like, oh, I hate gossip. And gossip are like, that stuff's pretty important. Stuff's it destroys empires and things, and builds empires and things. It's really, really powerful stuff. Just a little back and forth between you and your friends. Positionality is one of the key words of when we ask, I just dropped in to see what condition my position was in. What we're asking you to do is just check on those intersections and tendrils of who you are and how it connects to the work that you're trying to do. Because if you are communicating, that's the only area we need to get across to be like, if you are communicating to you, the little I in your head, interpreting the world and representing the world. Those are two huge steps where you insert yourself, whether you want to or not, into the conversation. And if you look at this chart, hopefully you can see the intersection. This is the next bit of what we're reading, of theory and method. Theory and method, that nexus, that connection, is that genuine dialogue, the conversation of people. The dialogical performance of genuine conversation resists foreclosing conversations. It opens them up. It tries to open up conversations. It doesn't want to shut down a discussion. It tries to open it up. In See No Stranger, this is a useful book to know. If I could teach a whole class on ethics, we would absolutely read it. Valerie Carr extends this thinking in a really, really important way. She says, you do not have to be next to someone or listen to someone to care for someone. Opening up a conversation does not mean exposing yourself to their own abusers. Believe them when they tell you who they are. If they do harm to your person, if they do harm to you, if that's who they are, then the most thoughtful thing you can do is to say, someone else needs to deal with that. Someone else needs to deal with that. The best positioned people in this chart are the people doing harm. Other men gotta call out men. White people gotta call out white men. That's how that's gotta work. When you are in a marginalized position and you try to open up dialogue with someone in a position of power, Valerie Carson, and can expose you to real harm. What she really emphasizes with See No Stranger is that all you have to continue to do is wonder about them. You're not allowed to foreclose on their identity. You're not allowed to say they are not worthy of care, they are not worthy of attention. Your job is to say they do harm to me and I'm not going to do it. And I hope someone else can get to them. Somebody else needs to get to them. And that being said, she gets death threats for lecturing. And, you know, maybe they're a joke, but if they're not, oh boy. And, you know, she lectures. Like that's this. At the end of the day, if we foreclose these conversations because of our own personal well-being, we end our genuine dialogue. We end our opportunity for dialogue. I say this because it's easy for me to say, but I tell people, let people stand there in their bigotry. If they are going to be a bigot, let them stand there in their bigotry, and then we will know who the bigots are. And that's a very different kind of mode than like deplatforming people and things like that. I believe in kind deplatforming. I think institutions have a right to determine who gets platformed. For instance, if I had a podcast, I would not platform a trans vote. That's not a question of censorship. That's not, shutting down a conversation. That's limiting where I'm going to have that conversation. I don't need the whole world to have a conversation about whether or not transphobia is bad. I need the world to know that it is. To know what it is. Opening up conversations with trans folks to describe what it is like. Yes. With people of color, yes. With immigrants, yes. With whatever the situation is, opening that conversation from those voices, yeah, but from the people who do them harm, not genuine dialogue. The people that would willingly do harm to other people don't have the stuff of genuine dialogue. This kind of thinking, I do believe, begets pacifism. I don't know that you could read Weber and not have to wrestle with what it means to be a pacifist. And personally, I have become a pacifist because of my readings on ethics. I am a debate coach first and an ethicist second. And the debate coach knows when an argument is won, and pacifism wins. And I just believe that, and so that's the person I try to be. But that does not matter if I cannot put it in method, in dialogue, with how I speak and how I relate to other people and what I study. The chart is useful for all sorts of reasons. It's for the researcher himself. Ethics on public speaking is going to have two main focal points. One, the consequences on the world. Two, the consequences on the speaker. If I use hateful metaphors, that will impact the world. It will change what I do. We can show both of those things. So to start our conversation this week on ethics, we've looked at a quick review of just like the history and how Aristotle's like, here's a list of things that you can do or not do to be a good person and be happy. And Madison is like, where are you in the conversation? What does your voice mean to the conversation? When you speak, if you remember the constitutive model, the second persona, the third persona, right? It requires a fundamental shift in ethics. Aristotle would say the third persona people, they're unhappy, but if everyone else is happy, it's an ethical speech. And Madison would be like, what does it mean to put people into an off-camera place again and again and again and again? What does it mean when we talk about racism using passive framing? Or domestic violence using passive framing? What does that mean? Just what does it do? Not am I a bad person for doing it? What does it do? That's all we want to know. So we reviewed that major structural shift. And now the question becomes, are you an ethical person? This can never be a question about hindsight. This can never be a question about the past. It's always a question about right now. To be an ethical person right now, you've got to be in dialogue. That's what that means always. It means listening, it means responding, it means participating. It's exhausting. It's really hard. We'll point the lens at ourselves, we will point the lens at the world. If people tell you ethics is a list of moral principles, you can say classic. But also, ethics is a study of the consequences of the ways that we live our life. I like to say that ethical problems are problems with being. If things exist, it creates problems. Judith Butler's terms, she says trouble. We get a bunch of trouble, gender trouble. It's just trouble, it's troubling. Just get trouble. No simple answers to those questions, but we do have 5 questions we can ask. We have 2 stances to avoid and 1 stance to approach. And we have a really cool grid for professionality to kind of figure out where we're at. The next chapter is on theory and method, kind of linking those. I ran a little long. Any questions, thoughts? Some great comments in the chat. What's going on? That podcast had me talk about the Nakayama bisexual community. An article that says that white people, when they shut down the conversation on whiteness, they tend to get angry.
Play some music or something.
Okay, I'm class, bro.
I got you. So, no, you good, you good.